Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another installment of the VolunteerMatch Solutions Best Practice Network webinar. This is Megan Kelly speaking from VolunteerMatch Solutions. We are very excited to have Taproot Foundation here with us today to present on building an in-house pro bono program. Those 5 key questions to ask before you begin. Taproot Foundation has been with us for a few webinars, and one of our speakers, Lindsay Firestone, also spoke at one of our client summits 2 years ago, so I'm very excited to have them back again. Before we get into the presentation, on the next slide I wanted to go over some logistics with the audience. So for those of you on the call, if you can hear me, please find on the side panel of your GoToMeeting organizer the question box or the chat box and type in and let me know you can hear me, the sound is good, we're excited for the webinar. Looks like everyone is on. Wonderful. Also, for those of you on the call, if you follow Twitter, you can tweet about the presentation with the hashtag #BuildProBono. We'll be tweeting from the presentation at both handles VM_solutions and Taproot Found. So before I turn it over to Diana and Lindsay, I'd like to give you a little introduction on both of them. We're very fortunate to have both consultants from Taproot Foundation's advisory service practice joining us today. Taproot Foundation is a national nonprofit that focuses on skilled and pro bono service, both with nonprofits and companies, bridging the gap between the two organizations. Lindsay Firestone founded the Taproot consulting practice in 2008. She's worked with dozens of Fortune 500 companies building out their pro bono programs and aligning them strategically with their business and philanthropic goals. Her focus is on cross-sector nonprofit capacity building. We're also joined today by Diana Fisher, a consultant with the advisory services practice as well. Diana specializes in program design and evaluation, and she's also the lead architect behind many of Taproot's thought leadership tools and training. Today's topic, building an in-house pro bono program, comes with the launch of Taproot's latest tool to help build or scale a pro bono program. It is called Build a Blueprint for Pro Bono Program Development. Diana and Lindsay, you're on the line.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are. Hello and welcome. I'd love to turn it over to you, and we'll begin.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan. This is Diana Fisher with the Taproot Foundation, and we're really excited to be sharing this tool with everyone today. We think it's a great new item that will help you really understand, start to finish, what it takes to build a pro bono program. You'll be hearing more from me later, but with that, I'd love to turn it over to Lindsay.
Thank you, Diana. You guys get the pleasure of hearing both of our voices back and forth, so hopefully it'll be enough to keep you guys engaged as we move forward with this. We are, as Diana said, really excited to be sharing the Build Blueprint with you, in part because it's the culmination of a lot of the work we've done over the last several years with a number of companies and national organizations and helping them to build their own in-house pro bono program. And we've been listening. We've heard from everyone we've talked to that people tend to get hung up in the same places. They have, the need to understand exactly what it is they need to know in order to get a program started. So what we've done here with the Build tool is actually have the opportunity to build this roadmap, to build a guide to help you know what you need to know. So as you can see here, that starts with laying out those 5 key questions that you need to ask to get a pro bono program started. This is really your starting place, and they'll probably be very familiar to you. They're probably questions you've asked yourself in your head before as you've endeavored to potentially start a program. So what we'll be doing here today is giving you a glimpse at what those 5 key questions are and referencing back to a lot of the learning elements you can then go online and find in the Build Blueprint that take you step by step through how you can start to answer those questions for yourself. So today we'll start with those questions. We'll give you insights into what you can do to get started, who should be at that table, so who you need to have on your side to be able to make the most out of this information, and then make sure you understand a handful of free resources that are going to be available to help you along the way as you're looking to build a program for yourself. So first things first, We know for all of you out there that are like us in Type A, everyone wants a checklist. With something like this, you have the chance to really understand at the outset exactly what it is that you need to be able to make happen in order to have something come to life. At the same time, we also know that a checklist alone isn't always the most helpful piece. You need to be able to have some understanding of how you can actually move down that list and check off those items in order to be successful. So what we have in the Build Blueprint as an added piece at the end is that downloadable checklist that you saw a preview of there, that you'll be able to have that by the end of this call and by the end of looking at the document itself, looking at the Build Blueprint, will help you now guide you through the steps of getting started. So today, we're now going to give you what you need to know to reference that blueprint and get that checklist started to be checked off. So let's start with those 5 key questions. What is it that you even need to know the answers to in order to get started? That first question, what do I want my program to accomplish, is where most people obviously get started. You might have already answered this for yourself, in which case you can move on to another question. But if you're really getting started and trying to think about what's necessary, you're going to need to answer that question first. Next, what projects make sense for my company? What is it that you should even bring to life in order to be able to have the most impact and accomplish the goals you want to accomplish? And how can you begin to understand what projects make the most sense? Then a launch plan. How am I going to start a program? And I know this is a question a lot of people start with, and we'll help you get answers to this question and also help make sure you can back out and answer some of those earlier questions first. How can I set up my projects for success? Obviously a very important question and one that's very dear to our heart in making sure that you're really focusing and creating pro bono programs and projects that are focused first and foremost in having impact and being successful. And then lastly, how will I evaluate and measure my program? So when all is said and done, how can you understand the impact you've had and learn about how your program has been designed and how you can improve it as you move forward? So I imagine a lot of these questions sound familiar to you, and what we're going to be doing now is helping you get a sense through the Build Blueprint of how you can answer these questions. That first step is having the right people at the table. So I'm guessing most people on the call here are that lovely little yellow figure in the upper right. You're working in community relations, community affairs, the foundation, whatever that department might be. Well, one of the biggest allies you can have in getting a program like this set up is a functional expert. That's the term we use referring to that person within a relevant department within the company whose skills you might want to put to use on a program like this. It's going to be that person in IT, that person in marketing who's interested in this program and can help you understand the skill sets that are going to be available to bring some of these projects to life. In the best case scenario, you have a little more company at the table. You'll have someone from human resources. Ideally, if you have a good relationship with your human resources department, they'll be a great resource in helping you understand the skill sets that are present within your company, the existing policies and professional development opportunities it might fit into, and an array of other benefits. In addition, it's really great to have an executive sponsor. This person can really rally the troops and really model for everyone else in the company the buy-in at the senior level to have a program like this come to life. Now, while it's best to have a full table, we know that a lot of people need to get started without some of those relationships. So at a minimum, we highly suggest you find that functional expert. You find someone who's in the department where you might want to get a program started, and they can really be your ally at the outset to help you think about what's necessary to bring a program to life. So then that first question you need to answer, what do I want my program to accomplish? What we tell people at the outset of thinking about program design is you need to ask yourself, why am I doing this? And then be honest in articulating all the things you want a program to accomplish. Only by doing so can you then make sure that the design of your program is going to be done in a way that really helps you focus on accomplishing these goals. Obviously, there are a wide array of things you might want to accomplish, but they generally will fall in 2 buckets. One first around community goals, that idea of having impact. But there are so many ways you might want to have impact. So as you'll see in the Build Blueprint, one of the things we lay out for you is being able to articulate all the different types of impact you might want to have, and then narrowing it down and prioritizing the top few that you really want to design your program around. Some examples here include deepening engagements with existing community partners, or maybe targeting a very specific signature issue area, or building relationships and gaining visibility in the community. each of these are important, but the way you design a program can help emphasize accomplishing different ones. So in the Build Blueprint, you have the opportunity to walk through that mental exercise and articulate the ones that are going to be most important to the design of your program. Then in addition, you have the business goals. It's important that you acknowledge that you will get business benefit out of designing a program and are intentional in designing a program to really take advantage of that. So similarly, we talk in the Build Blueprint about the different business goals that are most common in being able to recognize when you're building a pro bono program. You might have a particular focus on expanding the community impact, but in a low-cost way. But in addition, you might also want to be improving your reputation in the corporate philanthropy field or directly in your customer base, or really focusing on the professional development opportunities that are going to be associated with engaging your employees in a program like this. Whatever those goals might be, it's really important for you to be able to identify those most high priority pieces. So when you design a program, the model you choose and the way you set it up is going to really be focused on delivering those pieces. Now, another way to chew on understanding those business goals is by also referencing the Taproot Business Value Flashcards. It's an online tool that you'll see linked within the Build Blueprint online, which you can access on the Taproot Foundation website, and it helps walk through the top 5 areas of business value companies tend to get, and a few helpful talking points and proof points to help you have that conversation internally. So you've had the chance to begin asking yourself, why am I doing this? Well, the next important question that's tied to that is understanding how it should come to life in a way that accomplishes those goals. So for starters, you really want to understand the right model of pro bono service. For those of you who are familiar with the Taproot Foundation Service Grant Program, we focus on team-based projects, but there are a number of other ways that a pro bono program can come to life. So find out what it is you want to accomplish with your program, and then think about what some of those different variables are that are important to you. So one example, if you're starting a pro bono program and it's really important to you to be able to get a lot of people involved, but you know that you're not going to be able to engage people over a long period of time, then you want to choose a model that's going to best take advantage of those variables. One great example is Discovery Communications based out of Maryland. They had a big team of marketing and production professionals who had great skills that they knew their local nonprofits needed, but they weren't going to be able to do extended projects over a long period of time. But because those skill sets lend themselves well to concentrated periods of work, they took a look at the Taproot 8 Models Pro Bono Service white paper and attended the VolunteerMatch Client Summit a couple years ago and heard us talk about this marathon model, and they decided this is the way to go. So they decided to have a model where they would pull together all of their different marketing and production professionals in, I believe it was a 12-hour period, and they would have the chance to churn out marketing work for nonprofit organizations they coordinated with in advance. So that particular model met their needs and helped accomplish the goals that they'd laid out. Whereas another company we worked with wanted to engage a lot of different people within their company, but needed to do it over a more extended period of time, and they wanted to do more in-depth strategic projects. So for them, being able to bring a standardized team program to life was the best way possible to bring together people from different departments and different business units within the company to all come together in cross-functional teams over a period of 3 months to help a nonprofit organization. You can learn many more examples about loaned employee programs and the pluses and minuses for each of those by looking at the Build Blueprint and taking a look at the 8 models description. But by asking yourself this question and by moving ahead and looking at the models that bring different variables to life, you'll be able to start from a really solid foundation of the program delivery model that best aligns with your own goals for starting a program.
Great. So hopefully by setting up your strategy and thinking through some of those goals, you put some stakes in the ground, what you're really looking to accomplish, what you want to get out of the program. That sets you up really well to move into the next major question. What projects make sense for my company? Now, one of the things that we've seen happen is, say you have a department, IT for example, and they're really excited about getting involved. That's great. You definitely want energy coming from the various people that are delivering the project. But without thinking carefully about what nonprofit needs are, you might have IT people without a project. If they have skills that aren't directly related to existing nonprofit needs, you can run into trouble by not getting them on a project, and if they get disappointed, you don't want to dampen their energy at all by not having something for them to do right away. So thinking ahead of starting a program about how you can best match up nonprofit needs with available employee skills is a really important first step. So the best projects always match existing nonprofit needs with those available employee skills. Starting on the nonprofit needs side, there's a few ways you can go about this. One, send out a survey. If you have a pool of nonprofits you already work with, ask them some questions. Say, what challenges are you currently facing? What needs do you have? Get a baseline sense of the types of needs that are facing many of your nonprofit partners, and that will set you up well to start thinking about the types of projects that can help them. You can also do one-on-one conversations. If you have partners you're very close with, just schedule a time to ask them directly. Chances are their needs will be somewhat representative of the needs many nonprofit organizations face, and it can help you down that path to understanding which projects are going to be the most help. On the employee side, what's really important is finding someone who has knowledge of the employee base at your company. A couple of ways to go about that, and the Build Blueprint walks you through many more. One of the best ways, if you have a relationship with that functional expert who we know is someone you need to have at the table, ask them. And it's important to know it doesn't always have to be the most senior person. Often a more junior employee still has a perfectly good understanding of the types of skills that are present in their department and can help you really understand that and make an educated decision about what the ideal projects are for your company. If you want to get even more general kind of industry standard information, the Taproot Competencies Map, which is also available on our website and linked through the Build Blueprint, can help take the guesswork out of doing that matching process by explaining common project types and the associated skill sets we already know many nonprofits have needs for and will really benefit from. Okay, so you have this baseline understanding of what needs are out there and what skill sets generally are present at your company. Now it's time to ask yourself, how am I going to start a program? And as Lindsay said, many companies start this far down the process, but having that legwork already happens means you're really well set up to get started here and get started quickly. So we advise all of our clients and companies to start small. You really want to test the model. We've seen it happen where someone's very excited, say a more senior stakeholder, and says, I want every one of my employees doing this by the end of the year. Well, in a department of 200 people, that's a pretty daunting task. So by starting small, there's a lot of advantages. You can control the outcomes, you can ensure quality on the projects, and you can really test the design of your program before rolling it out on a larger scale. So the first step is to decide how many volunteers or how many nonprofits to involve. And as a general rule of thumb, we recommend somewhere between 3 and 5 projects is the right size to get started. Go back to your first look at nonprofit needs and employee skill sets. Is there a short list of pilot projects that you know you have interested and excited employees and some nonprofits that have those needs? Great. They're a really good place to start. Set up a follow-up conversation. Talk to that 1 or 2 nonprofit organizations in your area and say, okay, what are the specific projects you're dealing with right now? That'll give you a really clear short list of potential projects, and as long as you have the corresponding employee skill sets, you've got your list of pilots right there. The third step, if you have your list of pilot projects, start recruiting. Go back to that functional expert. See who you have a relationship with. It's not a bad thing the first time around to tap on the shoulder and say, we have this really great project. I think your department or your team would be a really good fit for it. Often employees are excited to get involved and demonstrate their leadership by being the test case, so to speak, and being the first ones on the scene to demonstrate that they're willing to take on this new and different challenge. The last step in starting a program is about developing all of the tools and trainings, including an orientation curriculum to support participants. We're going to look at this more in a minute, but it's definitely important to think about how you're going to support those teams and help them be ready to be successful, and there's a lot of pieces that go into that. So thinking about that more specifically, how can you set your projects up for success? At the total baseline, the first thing you want to think about is, what does success even mean? And Taproot's prepared a great resource that can help you answer that question. The Designing for Impact framework outlines the 5 key tenets of successful pro bono projects. These are the 5 things you definitely want to see happen with any pro bono project to ensure that it's successful and that you've done your job. The first, the project is completed and delivered in a timely manner. So pro bono projects don't have a monetary budget, they have a budget of time. You've allocated a certain number of months, number of weeks, number of hours against this project, against this need, and you want to make sure you deliver in that time window. It would be not successful if you had a nonprofit say they need a new donor database by the time holiday fundraising season rolls in. They're very busy and they really need the new technology. If timelines shift and it doesn't end up happening until January or February, that's a big cost to the nonprofit because they weren't able to meet their original need because of the timeline stretching. So important to consider that. The second, the deliverable is implementable and sustainable. Really important, the deliverable is only going to be helpful if the nonprofit is able to use that. So a great example of this, if a company, the marketing department designs a great new brochure and it's designed to print in a glossy sheet of paper with a lot of colors, and then at the end they find out the nonprofit doesn't actually have a printing budget to put against it, that can mean bad news for the entire project. So designing a project and helping set up the scope to have a deliverable that's going to work for the nonprofit and be something they can implement is really important. The clients' and volunteers' expectations are met or exceeded. So with this one, you get what you pay for. You don't want to have that happen with pro bono. It's really important to have the nonprofit client get a lot more than what they paid for, considering they're going to be paying nothing. So in order to do this, you want to just hit it out of the park and make the nonprofit be so impressed with the types of service that they receive and the deliverable that they feel like they're like any other paying client that you might have. The fourth one, all parties report high satisfaction with the group's interactions. It's important to be a good communicator, to work well with the nonprofit, to have regularly scheduled check-ins and timely responses to emails. All those are important pieces of making sure everyone that's involved with the project feels that it was successful and that it was not too much of a burden to manage the project itself. And the last one, and the most important one, the client reports that the project made an impact. At the end of the day, that's why you're doing it. You want to help your nonprofit. So making sure that whatever you give them ends up making them able to better deliver on their stated mission is the fundamental goal of any pro bono project. And again, if you're interested in reading more of a description about any of these, the Designing for Impact framework is available with Build, and you can find that online. Okay, so what does this mean when it comes to planning projects? It's great to know what success looks like. Now, here's how you can ensure that that happens. You want to anticipate common challenges. We've seen time and again these three very common challenges you see on the screen. Number one, team turnover. Halfway through a project, someone gets really busy and something else comes up, they have to drop off. What do? Well, you need to have a contingency plan, a plan B, to make sure that the nonprofit still gets what they're anticipating. Timeline creep. Again, this goes back to the number one key tenet. The budget is the time. So having something that's delivered takes way longer to deliver than what you originally expected can have negative impacts on how that deliverable ends up being used. Scope creep. This is another one. We see it happen a lot. This is where you can get very excited about the project. The team's very excited to help, and they start offering to do other things that weren't originally agreed to. And it happens from both ends. Say the nonprofit has an IT person in working on the website, and they say, hey, you know what, I'm having this problem with my hard drive. Could you take a look at it? Well, that's not really in the scope of the project that the pro bono team has set out to do. So being sensitive on both sides, that you're sticking to the plan and you are delivering exactly what you said you would, can also help avoid some of the other challenges around timeline creep and team turnover. So what can you do to avoid them? Well, you can have some common tools that we know are proven to help avoid these challenges. First, a service agreement. Help define the working relationship. Set the expectations out clearly. 24 hours for turnaround time on email. If the work is happening outside of normal business hours, explain that meetings might have to happen at 6 or 8 at night, and that the team of pro bono professionals are working and have their day jobs so that this work has to be done and accommodate a normal professional schedule. A scope template. Clearly establish what will or will not be accomplished during project work. And this is very, very important for avoiding the scope creep. If you put everything out on paper and you keep it really detailed, if you're doing a round of interviews, state up to 10 interviews. Put numbers down to help everyone have a common shared understanding of what the project is going to deliver. Also, define the roles and responsibilities. Have everyone on the team, both on the company side as well as on the nonprofit side, know exactly what's going to be expected of them. Last, a process overview. If you have a work plan, make sure to map out those key steps. Have the milestones, have the associated dates set out at the beginning of project work so everyone knows what's coming up and how long it's going to take. All right, evaluation. Now you may be looking at this and say, evaluation is really something that comes after my project has been completed. Why is it so important to think about it in advance? Well, the answer to that question is you have to know what you're setting out to accomplish in order to be able to measure that at the end and say, did I hit those targets? So having a conversation with the nonprofit and with the employees up front saying this is what you're hoping to get out of it, this is what the nonprofit is expecting, can then help you at the conclusion of project work look and see, did we hit those targets, how did it go? So it's really important to remember evaluation doesn't have to be scary. You can start with those basic satisfaction measures. Ask everyone how it went. How was the turnaround on communications? How did the whole process go? And then look at fundamentally, did we meet the need of the nonprofit? Did we do what we said we were going to do? That's the first level of evaluation you should think about. If you want to add in hour tracking and dollar valuation, that's great. It's an important part of tracking to know what the dollar valuation of the impact you're having is. Ask volunteers to track hours. And I know everyone in this audience says tracking hours is hard enough already. We understand that. What's best is asking periodically during project work, how many hours did you spend this month on it? How much time have you spent to date? But in reality, if you get an hours estimation at the end of project work, that's fine too. The hour tracking and dollar valuation tool on Taproot's website can be found through Build. It's a great way to help you walk through those calculations and includes industry accepted rates to help you actually calculate out what that specific dollar value is based on the skills you're using on any given project. If you're ready for a more sophisticated approach to evaluation, consider ROI, consider impact. These are great things to have, and if you're at a point in the program where it makes sense, you can get a lot of rich data about what kind of impact you're having and demonstrate why your pro bono service is so valuable. Again, if it's your first group of pilot projects, maybe it's understandable to wait and tackle that later on. But for example, Deloitte just released their Pro Bono Impact Report, and it's available through their website. They've invested a lot in tracking the impact of their program, and it's a great thing to look at if you're thinking about what that might look like down the road. Okay, so say you are down the road and you're ready to grow your program. What's really important to remember here is when it comes time to scale, you have to think about all your options. Time and time again, we hear, I'm ready to grow my program, so that means let me do more projects, let me increase the volume. But we know from experience, volume isn't the only way to go about it. Some of the things you can think about, geographies. Think about starting in a different office, a new location. Departments. If you were working with IT before, go to marketing. See what kind of skills they have and what kind of corresponding needs your nonprofits have. Project types. Explore a new model of pro bono service. So if you've done a marathon, think about individual service. It's a great way to continue to engage a large volume in terms of number of employees that can participate, but it's a different way and a different impact to reach your nonprofit partners. Staff involved. If you have leadership development groups or different HR programs, think about recruiting employees through those venues. It's a great way to get more people involved from different areas within the company. Project scope. To expand what you're delivering. If you've completed a website, think about a donor database or an IT needs assessment. There's many different types of projects within each functional area, and growing your program could mean delivering more types of services to your nonprofit. And finally, no surprise here, number of partners. You can go and you can invite new nonprofits. You can, maybe if you're recruiting current financial partners, you can think about recruiting non-financial partners in the community, other organizations you know have needs. So most importantly, when you think about growing your program, there's a lot of ways to go about it. Step back, look at your strategic priorities and your goals that you set out, and think about all the different ways you can deliver on those. And Lindsay, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. So what we've had the chance to do now over the last half hour or so is give you a bit of a preview of what goes into being able to answer these key questions and getting started with a program. And as we said before, what you can use is the Build Blueprint as a reference to give you a lot more insights and clues into how you can actually get in there and answer the questions for yourself. But what we want to do now, since we have the chance all together, is to give you a sense of what build looks like in real life for one company. So what we have here is an example of one company we've worked with Chevron, and how they went through this same question answering process themselves. So first, to get started, they knew they wanted to launch a pro bono program. They wanted to take advantage of the skill sets present among their employees in order to help their partners. So first and foremost, like we're hoping everyone will do, they needed to sit and think about what they wanted their program to accomplish. Well, in this particular case, with pilot projects, they decided they wanted to be able to have a significant impact on their existing local partners, finding ways to build their internal infrastructure and help them be more efficient and effective as organizations. From a model standpoint, they knew that they had a number of employees they'd be able to get going on projects, but they very much wanted to be able to use these projects to also pull people from different departments, to be able to break down some of those silos and get people involved together in cross-functional teams and delivering really strategic projects. So for them, the team-based model was the best option for these pilots going forward. Now, as I mentioned before, for your company, you might need to answer that question a little differently. This can be a place where companies will often get stuck. They might assume that team-based approach is going to be best. But when you sit and actually answer for yourself what inputs you have available, what amount of employees you have to get involved, what your goals are around involving people and around the time that they can contribute, you'll want to actually make your own decision about which model is best for you. Next, around that selection piece, thinking about the actual projects they'd be doing and the nonprofits with whom they'd be working. So they had an open array of departments they could pick from to be able to work with. They really wanted to focus first and foremost on starting with the needs of the nonprofits. But they had to know what those relevant needs were that they could actually use their employees' skills to help address. So in the Build Blueprint, we talk about a variety of different ways that you can go about assessing the needs of your nonprofit partners, and Diana mentioned some of them. In this particular case, what they did was issue a survey to a handful of their local nonprofits, asking about a variety of different needs that they would have as organizations that Chevron felt they might have the employee skills to be able to meet. Then based on that survey, they were able to then have a much more focused approach internally to finding out where there might be skill sets that would match up with those needs. In this case, when you picture that table that we talked about in the beginning, they only had one or two other people at the table. This was coming out of their PGPA department, their Policy, Government, and Public Affairs department, and they did have some functional experts that were at the table, but needed to do this outside of being able to have access to a magic spreadsheet from HR with a list of all the skills that were available. So instead, they did something else that we advise as another option, which is finding friends in the right departments. Most of you who have run other volunteer programs before will have a handful of staff members who are the super volunteers. They come to you for many volunteer projects. Well, they come from a wide variety of internal departments within your company. And in this case, because a lot of the nonprofits in their survey had expressed needs for IT support and business planning support, they were able to turn to a couple friends they had in those departments to begin to connect those dots and say, these are the needs we discovered nonprofits have. Would you be able to direct us towards the right people to understand if it's a good fit? So that's one of the many approaches that in this case worked well for this company to identify what skill sets might be present that could meet the needs that they identified among their community partners. Next, to launch. So needing to think about what would actually be viable for them to do from a piloting standpoint. Like Diana mentioned, it's important to make sure that if you're piloting a program, if you're just getting started and testing it, that you try to keep the number of projects relatively low. That way you can really invest in managing them. At the same time, you want to have more than one. That way you can really get a more accurate test of how the model will roll out. So in this particular case, they chose to go with 3 projects. This is also another stumbling block we've seen other companies come up against, where they've decided to just pilot one project to get started in order to save their own staff bandwidth. But as a result, if you have one particular thing end up going awry with that project, you lose the opportunity to learn from multiple different experiences. So in this case, the 3-project selection was the right way to go. So next, thinking about those questions we talked about answering, they needed to understand then what those needs were that would align with the skill sets they have, looking at the middle of that Venn diagram that Diana was explaining. So in this case, they asked those nonprofits who responded to the survey to identify which of those needs were their top priority, which were important enough for them to invest staff time in to be able to work well with the Chevron volunteers and invest in bringing this project to life. and then went back to their friends around that table, went back to those functional experts, and had them help them map out the scope and the work plan that would bring these projects to life effectively. You and your role aren't necessarily meant to happen to also be an expert in what IT needs are, in how to solve an HR issue, in how to bring a marketing plan to life. So what you can do, as we mentioned before, is tap those friends, tap those functional experts who are subject matter experts in this area. And that's exactly what Chevron did here. They were able to essentially enhance their own internal bandwidth within their version of the community relations department by bringing in someone from IT and someone from business planning to say, this is the need these nonprofits had. What would you do, in your professional opinion, in order to address these needs? And it was those functional experts that helped establish the scope of each of those projects and identify the roles and responsibilities that would be needed for the volunteers on those teams. So another great step, and one that we do call out as an example within Build, to help you think about how you can scope a project. If you have more advanced options, or if you don't have friends in functional departments, we also call out a couple other options that you can use in order to help scope out your own projects. So with Chevron, once they had the chance to scope out these pilot projects, get that subject matter expert opinion, they were able to get ready and launch and roll out these projects. Now, when it comes to being able to assess how a project's going, a lot of how you'll be able to do that with pilot projects is going to depend on your own bandwidth. This is another common stumbling block. We've seen a couple different companies try to get started without necessarily factoring in the reality of how little time they might have in their own team to be able to oversee projects as they're running out and ultimately do evaluation. So what we recommend, as Diana mentioned, is planning upfront for how you want to assess these projects and understand what you're trying to accomplish. So in this case, they were realistic with the bandwidth they would have for overseeing these projects and just set up periodic check-ins throughout the course of the project in order to collect feedback about how it was going. So they could use that to learn about how well the program design went. And then ultimately at the end, they had surveys for both the participants on the volunteer side and for the nonprofits to then measure how the project results went compared to what they wanted to accomplish at the beginning of the project. So by being realistic about their bandwidth in order to oversee and evaluate, and then by leveraging some of the recommendations we have in Build for how you can track hours and how you can get some employee-driven evaluation, they were able at the end to ultimately have a survey and have debrief information that they're able to use to evaluate the success of the program and also inform the way they want to think about building the program out in the future. And that brings us back to the kind of last little completion piece here within results. Not only were they able to roll out 3 successful pilot projects that helped 3 nonprofit organizations dramatically enhance the work that they were doing, and in essence also delivering the equivalent of about $120,000 worth of professional services, but it also now let them complete the circle and go back and revisit that strategy box again to evaluate how this program went and now begin planning ahead for their next iteration, thinking about what additional goals they might have and what additional models they might want to roll out in order to accomplish even more of their pro bono program design goals. So if any one of these steps sounded familiar to you, and if you think a program coming to life for you would need to stop at a similar place and ask some of these questions, then I think you too will find benefit in being able to look at the different suggestions we have for how to answer these questions for yourself. In addition, if you liked getting the walkthrough of what it looked like for one company, as Diana mentioned, another great resource will be Deloitte's new Pro Bono report that came out that shares their own 5 insights from their last 3 years of Pro Bono projects. And that's something you can access on their website as well. So in addition to that resource, there are a handful of other things you want to make sure you have access to in order to help you along your own path in answering these questions. Obviously, the theme for today was being able to give you that walking tour of some of the information and resources available through that Build Blueprint. And you can go online and interact with it online or even download your own PDF. It's available on the taprootfoundation.org website. You can go to the Lead Pro Bono section, and within Resources, you'll find a link to Build, or you'll be able to use this direct URL. And by doing so, not only will you have your own version of these templates to walk through how you can answer the questions for yourself, you also will get that handy checklist at the end to help you check off what you might already have answered and then put you in the direction of the most important questions you need to answer going forward. And then, of course, as always, in addition to providing this resource, if you need some assistance in being able to answer these questions or being able to build out your own program, as Diana and Megan also in the beginning mentioned, with Taproot's advisory services practice, this is something we do with companies and organizations on a daily basis. So in addition to making sure you have access to information like this, we also help companies like Chevron and others be able to answer these questions and build out their own programs. So we're always available to be able to talk you through some of those opportunities and answer those questions as well. And speaking of questions, with that, I'm going to hand it back over to our friends at VolunteerMatch to see if anyone does have questions they'd like to submit, and also to learn about a few other ways through VolunteerMatch you can have similar questions answered and gain access to other resources.
Yes, thank you so much, Lindsay and Diana. So for those of you on the call, a few of you have already sent in some questions, which I'll pose to Lindsay and Diana. But you'll find on your right side panel the question box. If you want me to share a question, just enter it in and I will ask it out loud. To start, Lindsay and Diana, thank you again for a great presentation. Also, a copy of the presentation and a link to a recording will be available afterwards as well. We had a number of nonprofits on the call. Could you speak a little bit to how nonprofits might identify companies that have pro bono programs or get involved earlier on in the process?
Very good question. And that idea of nonprofit readiness and access to pro bono service is a really important element of the equation here. One thing that I think is quite helpful, and you can actually also access it through Build, is the competencies map. So this is an online interactive tool that lets you search and sort by the type of project you might want to have, the type of need you want to have addressed. What that will help do is actually create for you a pre-populated description of the type of project you want to have filled. And we found what that can do is help you make a really informed ask of corporate partners. So while unfortunately there isn't already a one-stop shop for a place to post those requests, what you can do is take that written out description of the project you want, which also includes the types of skill sets you'd need to have present, and bring that to a board member. Bring that to a corporate funder. Bring that to an existing partner. What we've heard from so many companies is they have people who want to do projects. They have the employee skills. They just don't know how to be able to narrow it down to a specific project type and find an organization that's ready to go. So by helping you get that informed ask ready, you can connect with the existing relationships you have, particularly through board members, in order to get that kind of relationship started, and also add that ask to your existing financial request when you submit grant requests to corporate partners.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. Another question that came in from Angela is, could you share some best practices and ideas for recruiting employees to participate in your pro bono program?
Sure. That's a great question and one that we hear often. There's a lot of ways to go about it, and a lot of it can depend on what the culture is at your company. So some ways that we've seen it happen before: a brown bag lunch, an information session. With pilot projects, often it is kind of a tap on the shoulder, or if you know you're catering to a specific department or team, going in and doing a little show and tell about what the program is and why it's a good fit for their department. If there are other venues that happen regularly at your company, say a department meeting that happens every 2 weeks, or a breakfast where you share news and updates, people are accustomed to hearing about new things in these settings, and often that's a great way to kind of tap in. On the more formal end of things, if you are going through specific recruiting, you could set up a nomination process if you're really gearing towards leadership development benefits. Having participation on a pro bono project be an opportunity to recognize an employee for doing great work and wanting to give them an additional way to improve their skills in a new and different setting. You can go through the managers or go through that department and set up kind of a more formal process. So those are a couple ways we can go about that. Anything else, Lindsay, that you want to add to that?
I know a lot of ways that companies want to get started often will be going through affiliate groups, so other groups within their company that might bring employees together. And the main thing I want to point out to you about going around that approach is you do want to make sure that you are focusing on the skill sets that are going to be most relevant for your nonprofit partners. So while you might have easy access to an email list for an affiliate group, we have seen a lot of companies run into some challenges there where they've gone down that path and haven't gotten the right mix of people with the skill sets that need to meet specific project needs. So instead, we would recommend, as Diana mentioned, trying to spare your time by focusing in on specific departments, specific areas of skill where you know your nonprofits have needs. Then you can go in and, just like we talked about on the nonprofit end, do a really informed ask within that department. Go to that functional expert, go to that IT person you already know because they've come to all your other volunteer activities, and say, this is a specific scoped IT project that we find our nonprofit partners need. Do you or anyone else on the team have interest in participating? And if you need to go around that approach, if you can't use the functional expert to scope the project in the first place to get people interested, you too can use the competencies map. And you find that a lot of people are much more interested to raise their hand to volunteer when you're making a request for a specific project for a specific nonprofit organization than you will if you're just sending out a mass email. So that's another direction you can take to try to solve the same problem. And that and other suggestions are available within that question about which projects make sense for your company within the Build Blueprint as well.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay and Diana. This is a new question I haven't heard yet from Gabrielle. We're curious if, and perhaps this is something Taproot does, but for smaller companies without building an in-house pro bono program, are there organizations that allow companies to participate in an already up and running pro bono program, where I guess smaller companies go to them to get their employees involved in pro bono work?
Oh, good question. That's a pretty emerging market, I'd say, within the area of service. Depending on your geography, there might be some local opportunities, whether that's within a volunteer center or within other intermediaries there. Taproot Foundation, as I mentioned, does run its service grant program in 5 cities where we have local offices, and that's in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, and D.C. But in addition, one thing to think about is, depending on your industry, there also are going to be industry-focused channels. So the easiest example would be if you have a department in your company of graphic designers, there are pro bono programs that are set up through design associations or through alumni groups. So you might be able to tap into some of those intermediaries based on the skills that want to be used, not just as a company as a whole. But right now that is a more kind of nascent piece within the field in terms of being able to kind of outsource to an existing program.
We'll have to keep our eyes out for that. Going back to the slide that talked about Chevron's program getting up and running, you had mentioned looking back at what was, kind of evaluating the first launch and then what to change for the next iteration. Are there any common snags or obstacles that you've seen in your consulting work that usually companies then improve upon for the next year?
That's a great question. In terms of looking back on the whole process, what they would then do to improve the next round of projects. Is that the question, Megan?
Exactly, yes, and definitely not trying to stump you.
Yeah, no, I was just making sure I understood. No, that's a really great question, and we always emphasize that it's a continued learning process, and the whole point of piloting is to then set yourself up to grow later on and to continue to improve the quality of services. So I'd say there's a couple areas. A lot of times, one of the major hang-ups is recruiting. It's obviously top of mind. We've already even had a question on it in this setting. So looking back at your round of pilot projects, if recruiting maybe took a little longer than you expected, or you had to go through a couple of different individuals before you found the right person, kind of evaluating how those relationships are structured and which ones you're pursuing and what kind of messages you're taking to help get buy-in and get support for the program, that's one major area of learning that we've seen. Also, in terms of looking back at the lead time, a lot of times our clients and companies we hear from are really excited to get started and they want it happening yesterday. So being realistic about the time it takes to get up and running is also a key learning. So knowing about the lead time and saying, okay, we really need to set aside 6 weeks for recruiting and not just 2. Those are some of the timing considerations that definitely end up being top of mind for the next round. And it's really kind of the dry run. So if there are areas that you've had trouble or you thought would take a lot less time and ended up taking longer, I think it just helps keep everything in perspective, and particularly in the context of your own company. Say you schedule projects to launch in September, but it turns out one or more departments have their annual retreat during that time. You know, you can learn these things and say, next year I'm going to wait and launch in October because September is not the best month for my company. Those are some of the things on top of mind.
Great. Lindsay, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, well, I mean, Diana covered a lot of the most common ones we certainly see. I think if you were to dig a little deeper and look into some other things that have been reevaluated moving forward, a lot of it maps well to that growth slide that Diana was talking about, where with some companies it's about changing the way they approach things. With others, it's about learning about what they accomplished already and then wanting to grow and diversify. So one example is a company we've worked with where they had an existing loaned employee model where they had a very few select number of people be able to spend a significant amount of time embedded within a nonprofit organization elsewhere. And that program is incredibly successful. But at the same time, they recognized that they wanted to be able to provide similar benefits to employees who wouldn't necessarily be able to take that time away, or departments that wouldn't be able to spare someone for 3 to 6 months. So when they were going through their evaluation process, they found that the nature of work that was provided was great, but they needed to now diversify the opportunities. So what they did was go ahead and add an additional model. That was their process of assessing and making new decisions. So we work with them to help set up a domestically based, team-based program where people can participate during and around their existing job instead of needing to go off-site. So sometimes even just adding additional approaches is an important piece of that assessment.
Great. Another question we had, are there some examples of clients you've worked with or resources you could direct our audience for identifying blue-collar pro bono opportunities, like large manufacturing companies or waste management? What are some projects that those types of companies get engaged with?
You know, one of the great things about having exposure like this through this webinar and then through other contacts is you begin to hear about different work that different companies are doing. And I have heard quite a bit over the last 3 to 6 months or so, questions beginning to be asked about being able to use field employees in a variety of contexts in pro bono service. So I know that people are beginning to think about it. I haven't yet had the chance to see a lot of examples come to life and come our way. But one thing that our team is dedicated to doing is finding examples of different types of pro bono that are happening and being able to showcase that through newsletters that we send out every 2 months. So that certainly is something we will be showcasing when we find more examples. And you can access that through the email address that Megan posted in that comments area there, through advisory@taprootfoundation.org. In addition, you can look at the competencies map. There are going to be some project types that will leverage some of the skills you're thinking of. But the main advice I would have, in lieu of being able to reference specific examples already, is in looking to see the nature of projects those employees already do. What does their day job look like? What is it that they're already going out and doing? And then understanding where other types of entities, in this case external nonprofit partners, would have similar needs. One example that I know Diana can speak a little more to is a design firm with whom we worked. Where they had architects and they have engineers, and they also have the people who are contractors out there and taking care of demolition, and they are able to put them to use. Target's another great example, where they have a pro bono program where they were redesigning school libraries. And in addition to using their marketing people and their interior design and space design people, they also were using people out in the construction field who were going in and helping to actually put their skills to use in being able to renovate the libraries. So if you start with what they already do and then look at where needs might be parallel, like from a facility standpoint, or similarly, they at Target have a program where they've used some of their forensic specialists who focus on some of the shoplifting that happens within their stores. Well, they put those skills to use helping with other similar issues facing local communities. So look at what people in the field are already doing and try to understand where there might be parallels, and they can help you actually define what some of those projects might be that would meet the needs of community partners. But hopefully we'll hear more examples, and that's something we'll showcase as soon as we do.
And I actually just came across an example that might be helpful. Love to add it in, and I'm almost positive it was UPS, but it might be FedEx, so nobody telling me if it was FedEx and not UPS. But a shipping company had one of their district route supervisors actually partner with a disaster relief organization and look at the logistics of getting disaster relief supplies to sites where disasters have occurred more quickly, more efficiently, so services can be provided sooner. And there was one individual in a certain district that had stood up and partnered with an organization and I think was recognized as Volunteer of the Month or Year by that company. So there's one example, although I admit rough. I don't remember all of the specifics.
These are great examples, and the email I send out after with the presentation will include the email address to contact the Taproot Advisory Services team, so you can ask Lindsay and Diana more questions. We have another question pertaining to our nonprofits in the audience. What are companies and corporations looking for in a nonprofit when they seek a partner for pro bono work? Maybe could you share some advice on how the nonprofit could put their best foot forward to finding that match?
Yeah, and that actually ties in well with another resource that you can be on the lookout coming from Taproot in the coming year around nonprofit readiness, where we are going to begin having the opportunity for online trainings and curriculums for nonprofits to get answers to those exact questions. But a quick preview of that, one important element is going to be around demonstrating that you already have a project plan for how you would manage this kind of work. So a common obstacle that companies run into when working with their community partners and doing pro bono work is that they'll send in a team that has a specific scope of work and is ready to go on a project, and there won't necessarily be that same parallel structure within the nonprofit organization. So if you can demonstrate up front that you already have a solid decision-making structure, you can identify who will be in charge of working with the team, of overseeing your internal team as a nonprofit and working with that team of pro bono volunteers, and in making decisions and moving the project forward, that alone can make great strides in being able to demonstrate to your corporate partner that you are ready to go to be a good partner in making use of their project. Tied to that as well is also describing what your implementation and sustainability plan will be for whatever it is that they're doing. No company wants to send people in to spend their time developing something for an organization if it isn't able to then come to life and be made use of. So by partnering with your pro bono providers up front to make sure that the project they're designing is realistic for you to be able to implement, and then by describing to them how you are prepared to be able to make continued use of and benefit from their project, those two pieces are really going to go far in demonstrating that you are ready to go as a partner. Diana, any others to add?
No, I think that's great.
And as I mentioned, you can be on the lookout for more information about that and making sure we have access to more information like those suggestions that can help nonprofits better access those services.
Lindsay, do you have a timeline of when that will be available?
Yes, well, I know that at the end of 2012, there is going to be a book that compiles all the different aspects of nonprofit readiness together. So that's something that we're hoping that nonprofits will be able to easily access through some of their corporate partners and funders and make that available to them. In the short term, I know that's in the process of being developed now. So I don't know off the top of my head an exact date, but I know, again, if you sign up for a newsletter or even follow Taproot on Twitter, those are the kind of things that we always share when we have something exciting coming out.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, there is a wealth of resources at Taproot. Taproot's Twitter account is @TaprootFound, I believe. So if there are more questions, and I have a few, and we'll connect you to Diana and Lindsay afterwards, but since we're coming to the top of the hour, I wanted to give you both an opportunity to leave us with a few last comments.
Sure. Thank you, Megan. I think I want to just leave everyone with, for me, this resource is so exciting because it stitches together so many different pieces of the puzzle. A lot of times, Taproot has a wealth of information about specific stages along the way, but this is the first time they've really been compiled into a roadmap. So I'm so happy that everyone got to share in the webinar today to kind of get the walking tour, but I definitely encourage you to go and download the tool and share it with other people who you think would find it useful. Lindsay?
Yeah, and I echo that directly and say one of the other reasons why I think we're so excited about this tool is that we worked with companies just like you in order to create it. So we have the benefit of having the knowledge of bringing to life so many different programs and overseeing so many pro bono projects. But by working directly with partners at Capital One, at Gap Inc., we have the chance to then really view this from the standpoint of a company who's looking to get started, who's scaling their program, who needs to have these questions answered. So I think you'll find that it is in your voice, and we'll speak to you directly wherever you are in that process and provide you with the resources you need. And as always, as Diana mentioned, we are very focused on continuous learning. So as you go through your own process, as you follow the map and go through the checklist and have additional ideas or questions, that's something we always encourage you to then follow up with us about. So we can either help you answer those questions for yourself, or you can even help us understand what's next in the field of corporate pro bono and how we can help you address those next hurdles down the path in building these kind of programs.
Wonderful. Thank you both. For those of you on the call, definitely stay informed by reading our blog, Volunteering is CSR. And also, the next webinar installment we'll be having is with CECP, Committee Encouraging Corporate Philanthropy. Allison Rowe, the Manager of Standards and Measurement, is going to discuss their recent research, Giving in Numbers, Emerging Trends in Corporate Philanthropy. So join us on Wednesday, July 13th, same time, same place. And I will be sending up a follow-up email to this webinar, so you can contact Diana and Lindsay at Taproot Foundation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.